Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Imaginary Movie Podcast, a podcast where we watch a movie and then we talk about it. My name's David, and sometimes if you want to be elite, you've got to do a righteous hack, Sam.
That's the same line I was going to use.
It's the line from the movie.
Hey, my name's Sam, and if you want to be elite, you've got to do a righteous hack. God damn it. It's right at the very bottom of the IMDb quotes page as well, and I just went all the way
I was like,
all the way through.
The same quote.
Holy moly! Wow. So week, welcome.
Let's jump straight into it before we do the whole pat ourselves on the back about how funny we are. We'll save that for
we are funny.
We are funny. This week we watched the movie Hackers from 1995, the quintessential, ridiculous, silly hacking movie. I would say probably. I think The Matrix is probably the hacking movie, I guess, because of its longevity. But I think this is kind of like the pure. It's this and War Games or Wargaming, whatever that movie is called.
War Game, yeah. That's a great 80s, computers, wow, movie. This is a 90s, hey, computers, wow, movie. And it's like, it's so aggressively the middle of the 90s. Like, it's in your face just how.
The production design, the costumes. I mean, they're not even costumes. This is the ridiculous thing I want to touch on now. It's 1995. This is just how kids were dressing.
Literally, this is I know, and this is why I think this movie has captured me. I'd not seen this before, and it's one of those ones where I'm really questioning how I hadn't seen this before, because it should be. It's everything we want from a movie, isn't it? It's ridiculous. It's got, it's nerdy stuff. They talk about RISC architecture and PCI buses and all these like random computer things, and it's set in our favorite decade. Because we're pathetic babies who need to reminisce about the 90s at all times. And so why wasn't this movie, and why isn't this movie, I think, higher up in the cultural sphere?
Do you know what it is?
Question
it's the
explore.
box office bomby nature of it, that this movie kind of like lost about 13 million at box office. It really didn't do well. And
budget
we can get into
20,
the reasons why this didn't do well.
Yeah, budget 20, box office 7.5, but then I think, maybe like streaming, not streaming.
This is the reason I watched this, and I suggested we watch this, was because it's a cult classic, which is a term we come across quite a lot. And I love, generally, it's quite a good way to be like, I tend to like these movies. And it's a movie like this that came out, no one really saw, no one particularly liked, but then it comes out on VHS, or I guess modern day DVD, or even more modern day streaming, but it becomes the popularity for the movie. It comes much later. Heathers was similar. Lots of movies we've done that I've suggested, I kind of fit into this mold of a movie that really didn't make a big splash when it came out, but it was teenagers watching the video until the tape wore out that made it a popular movie that's still talked about today.
Yeah, and we love those movies, don't we? Because they're the ones that maybe require maybe a couple of watches to really kind of like enjoy and to uncover all the different intricacies of them. But also, this would have been difficult to find. Like, this wouldn't, in the 90s and early 2000s, you couldn't just load up a movie from a streaming website. You had to find it. It had to be a tape, which means you had to go to a Blockbuster or similar. And actually, physically, like, it would be difficult to get this movie. And so I guess you also create the subculture that goes with that. Heathers is a great example of that. Drop Dead Gorgeous is another example.
Empire Records, I don't know if you've seen that, but that's another like bit of a bomb. Again, it's a teenagers watching the videotape, and like that's then they grow up, they're talking about it. You've got message boards in the early aughts, and then suddenly, it comes on streaming, or it got a DVD release. It got a 20th anniversary release. Like, for a movie that bombed and made no money, it's kind of phenomenal. And that's the true cult classic. There is nerds basically being like, yeah, this is really good. But usually, the reason a cult classic becomes a cult classic is because it is good, it is entertaining, it is a bit different usually. And there's a theme where quite a lot of counterculture stuff kind of lives in indie movies like this that no one saw and didn't make any money. And so, but then that's the same reason that they go on to become much more beloved, is because there is something a bit odd about them. Either they're a bit experimental, or they're just portraying something like this, which is silly and never really existed in the way it's portrayed in this movie. But it doesn't really matter because it's really fun, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So,
Do
in
you
Hackers,
have a plot summary?
I do. A young boy is arrested by the US Secret Service for writing a computer virus and is banned from using a computer until his 18th birthday. Years later, he and his newfound friends discover a plot to unleash a dangerous computer virus and capsize some oil rigs or something, oil tankers. Like, I've got to be honest, didn't exactly follow everything that was going.
Valdez oil spill.
I think that was 80s, wasn't it? I think that was.
You saw that already
80s.
happened. I think this movie is kind of like taking that as a, well, we'll do that again. As like
that
the
was 89.
Yeah,
that was the year 89. So
like
yes,
recent
definitely.
enough that it was something that we would be scared of, and that's what struck me in this movie, was that nowadays, obviously, with the BP oil spill, like we no longer care about oil spills because there's all sorts of horrible stuff going on in the world, and we've just had the pandemic, and we really are through the looking glass. Like, this movie is
oil spills are the least of our worries.
Bing, bing, bing. But like, that's why this isn't this movie. So sorry, go on, Sam.
Yeah, well, no, that's a really good point. That's a really good point about, because that's 89. This is so as they were writing it, this is when it would have been prime. The oil would have been still dripping off those poor birds. Like it. That's a really good point. It actually all of a sudden makes sense why there's oil tankers in this film, because watching it, didn't really understand. We never see them, and I think presumably they couldn't afford the budget for 5 oil tankers or whatever it is that they're trying to attack. But even why the hackers are involved in oil tankers, and there's no manual override, or is it's on the top of a very high pole over a volcano filled with sharks. Like, we don't seem to have much logic about what's going on, but it's kind of incidental, isn't it? Like, this is a movie about the subculture of hackers, which I think is mostly made up, and how like they interact, and these characters trying to basically just.
I definitely want to dive into this movie and the character things, but I want to talk about hacking a little bit first,
okay,
and to address your thing about this not really being real. Like we said, no hacker was ever this cool. That's absolutely 100% certain. No hacker was this well dressed or this attractive or this cool. Sorry, hackers, it's just a fact. But there's quite a lot of things in this movie that are making an attempt to kind of mirror reality, in a sort of diffuse way. So the trial at the very beginning, where Johnny Lee Miller's character, who's called Dade, I believe, is on trial. That's based, the crime he's accused of committing is based on a real thing. Somebody, a student at MIT, I think, for a bit of a laugh, because this is how all stories like this start, for a bit of a laugh, designed a computer worm, released it on the internet, allegedly not trying to cause any trouble, and that infected even, I think, over 2,000.
1,507 systems is the line we get in this movie of like,
you
crashed
the actual
more than 1,500.
The Morris worm, I think, if you Google the Morris worm, it'll take you to the Wikipedia article and you can educate yourself. Not you specifically, Sam, but the listener.
I'm educating right now.
And basically, it costs. Basically, it took about 2 days to disconnect the computer from the network and scrub it of this worm, scrub the code of this worm. And if you didn't do that, it would just spread to more and more machines, and then you couldn't really use a lot of the functionality. And so the cost is, some people reckoned it might have been millions it actually cost to fix this. So that's based on a real thing, and they've taken that. And again, that's something that would have been reasonably well known at the time, if not understood. And they take that, and that's the start point of this movie, is this guy did this thing in the 80s, and now it's the 90s, and what are we doing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually quite fascinating. I'm not going to sit and read Wikipedia to you, but
It
it's
is. It
really
is.
like
I knew I'd made a mistake when I said look at the Wikipedia article. But that's based on
yeah.
a real
Sorry.
thing. And again,
Yeah.
it's an attempt to kind of like tie this movie into the reality. There's a couple of times it does that, and apparently also, so a lot of obviously hackers, and we weren't really cognizant in '95, but like hackers do have stupid like names, and I'm not going to name some of the actual people, but because they're all like basically TED Talk guys now. But a lot of the really famous hackers from this era did have like weird sort of stupid, well, acid burn and
But what they were is they were usernames on message boards. You know, BBS message boards. It wasn't
yeah.
even in the late 80s. It wasn't even HTTP web. Like it was message boards. It was using like the very early days of the internet and then creating this culture. So when I say I don't think this is based on reality, what I think I mean is that like people were doing this and messaging was going, you know, was going on, and there were lots and lots of hacking and all this stuff, but nobody was this cool. Like, and that's where I think this movie is really, really fun, because it takes what is eventually a bunch of nerds and makes them into something that's
They're the Lost
like
Boys, basically.
Yeah,
like it's
and they
kind
seem
of
to
in the
live
leather jackets, and they live like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
They live off the grid.
I couldn't get away from that.
They're not they're not constrained, and it's just them and Shredder just hanging out. You know, like there isn't really
the
much
90s
more.
where all the teenagers were 25 and they're all sexy as shit.
Yes, yeah, and they all are about in their mid-20s, aren't they? Even though they're supposed to be in high school. Yeah.
Actually, I will say, to give this film a fair shake, they're all in their early 20s at least, which is a departure from the, you know, the American Pie 35-year-olds.
Hey, you're not gonna pay kids, are you? So I think that's.
You can't. I don't think you can have kids acting this sexual with one another and not have somebody raising some eyebrows and calling in the authorities. You know.
Yeah, yeah. So you've got your main dude, Johnny Lee Miller plays Dade, Zero Cool, Angelina Jolie in a very early role for her, and then lots of other people we're not going to go through. But I think that's the two main characters, and it's like it's their story, isn't it, really, of how they come together. They don't like each other initially, and then what can we do to, you know, try and get this couple going, and eventually
this movie kind of relies on all the major tropes you'd expect. So it's a new school. It's the new kid at the new school. It's getting the band together, which we love in a movie. It's the rivals becoming friends, becoming lovers, which again, decades of Hollywood history. It's kind of all there and framed in this kind of like electric, like really like 80s, 90s aesthetic. The way they're dressed, the places they hang out, the way that they're talking. Matthew Lillard, just in this movie, I think is the purest, cocainiest form of Matthew Lillard I've ever seen in anything.
Well, he's playing the exact same character that he played in, I want to get this right, Scary Movie? No, Scream?
Scream.
Is he in Scream? It's in Scream. Oh, shit, I got it wrong.
He's in Matthew Lillard, Sam. He is all over movies from this period. He is all over it. He's in She's All That. He's in Scream. He's in Scooby-Doo later on with all the other like former teen stars. Matthew Lillard has had a surprisingly like busy career, and he was the guy in the 90s, and this is like the pure Matthew Lillard stoner comedy stuff.
He's done really well for himself, hasn't he? I mean, he played Shaggy with at least I think a couple of
they did a couple of those movies,
movies which are absolutely terrible, but like Scream is where he I think is probably at his peak, but he still seems to be working and like he, you know, still playing Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, he was in Bad Girls,
cartoons,
which was a Netflix show. He's the husband in that. He's all right as a 45-year-old man.
Yeah, actually, he is Scooby-Doo through, you know, up to your eyes, every single animated Scooby-Doo, 2 a year, playing Shaggy. Like, good for him. Good for him. That's
man works.
I think that's
man
fantastic.
Works.
Yeah. yeah. So, but yeah, you're right. He does sum up that era, doesn't he, of actors? He sums up the mid to late 90s, and I think how he's presented in this movie, and also how all of the other characters are presented, I thought was really interesting. Like, it struck me straight away that these characters are kind of subversives. They're kind of off. You know, they're not normative, you might say, and there's maybe a kind of like bit of queerness going on here as well. And I think like all of this is such an interesting take. Like I think for us, because growing up in like what you would say the 2000s, kind of rejected a lot of that stuff. It rejected a lot of the grungy stuff. Everything was
the 9/11 era.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, conform, otherwise we'll destroy towers. Like, they really, really, I think, got rid of films like these kind of subversive movies. And I think there's some interesting stuff about gender in this. There's the way people dress. There's lots of undertones, and it's something that's been recognised elsewhere as well, which I think is really cool. And so straight away, you can see why this movie was something that like teenagers started watching, and it wasn't something that was going to get any sort of mainstream interest.
And I'm amazed more teenage movies don't kind of like hit this nail harder of like, do you know what, all teenagers have a unified, like all teenagers have the same experience of feeling that they are weird and different, right? That is just a universal experience that everyone in high school has. And that's the reason that movies like this, where you've got, like you said, atypical characters and personalities and types doing things and being represented on screen, is kind of like you can understand why someone would have this movie and it would be their favorite movie, because, you know, there's a little bit of realism there. I also really like in this movie the sexuality, and let me explain that, not just because I'm a horny pig, which I absolutely am.
Hey,
what I mean,
I'm sign me up.
It's really nice, the Angelina Jolie character. It's really nice to have. Yes, she's the object of everyone in the movie and in the audience's lust, right? But then she's also lusting for Johnny Lee Miller. It's kind of nice to. There's a lot of movies, and even movies we watch, and even movies we like, where it's kind of like a taboo that women can't be horny, basically, you know?
Yeah.
Women are the object to be attained, but they aren't like a real thing. So it's kind of nice to have that in the movie.
Wallflowers.
It would have been nice if they cast a second woman in this movie, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah. Hey, it's the 90s. What do you want? What do you want? You know?
Well, to be fair, we did get Lorraine Bracco because it was the 90s and she was contractually obliged to be in every movie in the 90s.
To be in every movie, yeah. No, it is a really good point. And you said that you've said this before, but we don't get sex in movies in the same way anymore, because
we don't get
it's not
sexuality
just about
in movies anymore.
Yeah, everything's, again, it's homogenized, sanitized, dumbed down version that middle America can enjoy, and movies like this. And when you go back, I'm thinking Blade Runner is another good example of where like that movie is full of sexuality, and it's willing to go there, and it's also willing for the main characters to partake in that as well. And that's the thing I think we've lost, is that yes, there might be things that that happen in the movie that are sexual or whatever else, but it's almost like there's a moral thing going on, isn't there, where the bad guys do that. You know, the bad guys are the ones who were kind of getting it off. So when we see in this movie, like, they're all just absolutely gagging for it. Like, it's insane. It's insane.
It's a cool line they walk, though, because there isn't actually any sex in this movie. Johnny Lee Miller and Angelina Jolie have separate dream sequences, sexy dream sequences, but they aren't things that happen in the movie.
With nudity as well.
Lorraine Bracco, with nudity, and Lorraine Bracco and Fisher Stevens, who I love in this movie. It's kind of how we see them in bed a lot, but it's kind of like we just shagged because we're smoking in bed. I love
smoking.
that movie. Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, nothing better than 90s sex and then a cigarette in bed. Ooh, yeah.
Look at
It's
all
like
the
all those ads about not
stained.
smoking in bed.
Look at all the stained wallpaper that they've got in that, in their room because they smoke in the house, in the bedroom. You sleep there. Okay, all right, that's fine. That's up to you. It is, and you know what? I think we should call for more of this. This is an 18 though, which I thought was interesting, and
Again,
I
part of the
did.
reason it didn't make any money as well, certainly.
Totally, totally. But I was surprised because I watched the trailer and I'd read up a little bit before I put it on. And the thing that I thought going into I thought this is going to be like a light-hearted, silly, zany, like largely lacking in substance movie about hacking, and it's going to be all like we're going to the cyberspace and
Which it is.
it absolutely is. Exactly. You know my punchline. But what it has with it is like this real energy and this real edge and all of this weird gender fluidity and like all this stuff that I just was not expecting. I really was not expecting for it to be so for it to be so like inclusive as well, just I mean, not to make too much to deal with it because it's the 90s, but there's just a lot more going on here than I think you'd maybe expect from this type of movie.
It's the sort of movie that is a bit of a revelation, and we do this occasionally with movies. And I certainly watch a lot more movies than you do. I think because I just have so much more free time. I've watched a movie every day this week.
Yeah, all right, you son of a bitch. Fucking rubbing it in.
I started watching it after 10 o'clock at night, by the way.
Yeah.
But
If I
like
do that,
movies like this, where
I'm asleep after
you
20
go in,
minutes.
you go in without any expectations. I'd kind of heard of this movie. I hadn't watched it because it had passed us by a little bit, and it's not the sort of movie that Marnewell would have allowed in the house, obviously. Until we were teenagers, by which point we were watching other stuff.
She takes computer security very seriously.
She did once, story time. She did once confiscate all of the computers and TVs in the house. Her bedroom looked like a pawn shop. I can't remember what it was. Something about some homework issue. And big house, lots of kids, every TV, every computer. She cut the plug off the TV in the front room because it was too big to move. It's a whole thing. Anyway, that's a sidebar story.
We were more the sort of trauma.
We were more the sort of American Pie generation. That was the movie, kind of like of this ilk. But that's kind of a pale. This movie is kind of just it's weird. It's a pleasure to look at. I loved the idea. The actual act of watching this movie is just, and it's sometimes easy to forget that we watch a lot of plot heavy films where you're kind of more just watching what the characters are doing and what they're saying, and there's a plot unfolding, or you're trying to find out who the murderer is. And this is a movie I was just watching. Sometimes you have to switch your brain off. There's a lot of stupid hacking shit, but it's just a visual treat, and not in a way that like that Avatar is a visual treat. It's just obviously somebody put a lot of thought and effort into making sure that in every scene there is something to look at.
Yeah, it's surprising. Again, it's surprising in that, I think, because you see so many scenes of like, okay, we're going to do the hacking scene now, and how are we going to do this? And usually it's some guy with a cigarette in his mouth. I'm into the mainframe, and we get it's all about like the person doing the hacking. That's the thing.
The sweaty guy from Die Hard.
Yeah. Boris from GoldenEye, clicking his pen, blah blah blah, and this is not that, because we have like montages basically where there's MC squared, like literally algebra is floating on the screen in like this aura, and there's like lasers, almost like amoeba style little creatures flying around.
What's that Da Vinci Code ripoff with numbers? And it's that, because it's the Da Vinci Code thing, isn't it? But with numbers. And there's a movie. Anyway, I think it's Nick Cage. Anyway, this isn't that conversation.
Yeah. But
it's that sort of thing.
Like stuff on the screen. And then if it's not that, it's these like Tron-like physical representations. Now, have you seen Tron? I hope you've seen Tron.
Of course I've seen Tron.
Good. I was about
contentiously. Tron Legacy is one of my favorite movies.
I love
Um,
Tron Legacy. We should do that next week.
and
It's a great
we
movie.
are in a minority there. The internet hates that movie.
I think it's a
Like,
great. I think both are
and
good, but I think it's a great film.
I think it's good in the way that this movie is good in terms of like, yes, it may not be this. This is not a perfect movie. We'll get into why the plot is kind of nonsensical and silly and incomplete and poorly edited. And Tron Legacy is kind of similar, but it's just a visual and audio treat. Like,
Yeah,
I just love
and
listening to it. I love watching it. I want to be there.
and just like Tron, I think this movie manages to capture that sense of like computers. How do they work? Like that's the thing I think that they're really going for. And when you're walking down these literal highways, these massive digital skyscrapers, and they're kind of representing the hacking through that, along with some genuinely like they have lines in here. They said something about there's a line about risk architecture is going to change everything, which is a really like prescient and funny joke because it completely did. I'm not going to explain what that is, but like there's lots of stuff where actually the film is kind of stupid, but there's enough there for it to show
It's
that they know what they're talking
it's
about.
only stupid in the ticking clock way. I think that's the biggest way that they kind of cheat the thing is actually hacking is mostly quite boring and you couldn't really, this is why they do the floating numbers and the E equals MC squared like floating around and the the video game kind of montages and the Tron stuff. It's all there because actually someone just typing on a keyboard for hours on end is really, really dull and there's kind of not a
Yeah,
movie there. Um,
yeah.
shall we talk a little
Should we
bit
talk?
about the actual plot?
Let's do it. But I'm going to just
Because I
say
want to
this right
set
now.
out like,
I don't have any idea really what's going on.
well,
I lost
so what
track.
I'll do then, Sam, is I will just briefly I'll explain the plot movements and why we're doing the things that we're doing. So kind of for a lot of this, we've got kind of two movies running in parallel. You've got Johnny Lee Miller goes to this new school in a new city in New York. New York is definitely, we are in New York.
Hmm.
No, it sounds like they're in New York, but we are in New York. There's a lot of shots of New York. We've got Johnny Lee Miller at a new school making new friends. He's this former 11-year-old, like, criminal. I'm not sure. Again, not sure if the US judicial system can hand out like suspended sentences for you're not allowed a computer. Anyway, it's irrelevant. And he's at a new school, new friends. You've got the awkwardness there. He's kind of like instant tension with Angelina Jolie. On the flip side of that, you've got this this BP company, this Exxon Valdez company, and Fisher Stevens is their head of cybersecurity. He's a hacker. We know this
Hmm.
because he's going around on a skateboard and he wears a long trench coat and he's smoking weed throughout the entire movie. So it's really clear
The
he's a hacker.
skateboard. The skateboard is
The
so important.
hold the skateboard conversation because there's a
Okay,
bigger conversation to be had.
hold on.
So you've got him and Lorraine Bracco, and they are like I said, the cybersecurity people at this company. We set up at the very beginning that somebody has put a virus into their system that has taken over basically, and there's no manual override. It's taken over the buoyancy control systems for it might be 10 or 15 oil tankers. And the ticking clock of the movie is
Okay.
that in a certain amount of time, they're basically being blackmailed, and this hacker says, if you don't pay
Hmm.
me X amount of money by X date, I'm going to flood the buoyancy thing to this system, and I'm going to flip these tankers. That is the ultimate thing that we are battling against in this movie. Go on.
Right. Okay. Who is the hacker? Who's the one who's threatening this? Is it
We don't know.
Fisher Stevens?
This is the problem. I don't think the hacker has a name. It's just somebody. So like
But
this is, and I think this is the core problem of the movie is it doesn't tell you who the guy hacking the thing is. It's just somebody has
okay.
hacked us and they've put this virus in, right? So we
But
see
it, but
Fisher
it's Fisher.
Stevens.
It is him.
Fisher
Isn't it? He's
Stevens.
the
It
play.
is him. But I'll get to that. I'll get to that.
Okay. Okay.
Spoil it for the audience.
Sorry.
So we have that, and that sets up that. And that, on the face of it, is kind of like it's a James Bondy, Austin Powers-y sort of like, this is what the bad guy's trying to do, I'm going to bomb the entire of France and destroy it unless you give me $20 billion.
Alien friend. So you said that this is two parts to this. We're still on the first part, right?
Yeah. This is the sort
Okay,
of like
second
the
part.
initial setup we get while we're not really doing much with the kids, essentially. And
Okay.
then the bulk of the movie is about these kids interacting with one another, building their relationships. We get Dade, the character, like he gets to meet all of the Nikon, who's the older friend of theirs, who they go round to his house and
Mm-hmm.
get drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you meet Angelina Jolie, obviously. Her character name is Acid Burn, or she might even have an actual name. It's irrelevant.
It's
Um,
weird.
you meet
Yeah.
Joey, who's the kid. He's kind of like oh, I really want to be a hacker too. And he's desperate for approval. And then what's the Latin guy called?
Oh, this guy is called, as quickly search, he's called Ramon, the Phantom Freak, played by
He's cool,
Renoli
yeah.
Santiago.
And he's the friend at school who's like, "Hey, you're elite. Elite is the word we're chucking around all the time." And the movie really
Yeah.
does believe in
Leet.
the hype of elite.
Mm-hmm.
And we're meeting all them. We're hanging out. We're kind of like, again, we get a bit more hacker stuff sprinkled in. Did you know that when they're talking about all these like manuals and things, and they're getting them out, most of them are real. Like most of them are real things that hackers kind of shared between each other and wrote and made to kind of like make it easier for other people to do the same thing. And the first major movement of the movie, outside of everything else, is Joey, who it's been established doesn't actually really know what he's doing, accidentally hacks into the BP mainframe. We see Fisher Stevens catches him and throws him out the mainframe, and the next morning 45,000 FBI agents storm his flat with AR-15s, which
finally
is
got him.
something I feel like the police, inappropriate police, like raids in this movie, they just get more cartoonish, and I'm there for it.
Yeah.
The fact that they kind of bust in on him, and then when Ramon gets arrested later, it's even more people, and there are literally like 15 heavily armed SWAT team members in his bedroom.
And there's one where they're in the shower, and there's like it's a whole ridiculous escalating.
And I love it.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of fun, like that. They're not just killing them as we see now in police SWAT raids. Like at least that's not happening. So
at least that's not happening.
Right.
So
okay.
then the film basically crystallizes into the plot being that while the kids are having this weird like mating ritual between Jolie and Miller, where they've got this competition to fuck with this FBI agent, which is hilarious. They're doing that, and Fisher Stevens and the board of execs are trying to figure out this mole and figure out all of that. We don't really know what's going on. It all crystallizes into that Joey has hacked into their mainframe and downloaded a lot of the source code for the worm in the mainframe. And it turns out that Fisher Stevens obviously is behind it all, and then he needs the disk with the code back from these kids, and then obviously at some point maybe decides to frame them. So because it's him and Lorraine Bracco that are stealing money from the company. None of that's very well explained at all.
See, I did not. I understood that obviously Fisher Stevens wanted to stop them, and that they'd managed to get something. The garbage folder, or like it's really
just a code dump that basically is a bit like a digital fingerprint for this source code.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the bit I think where, especially in like the start of the second act, we just get lost, don't we? We just get completely lost of like what's going on. And the reason that I think it's still entertaining is because visually you kept going. There's all of these great scenes. There's all of these montages. There's all of this great music. The music in this and the whole soundtrack is just amazing. Yet it doesn't really matter, that you don't really know what's going on. And that's because of all the reasons I just said. So it's helpful that you've explained it to me, because I think I'm following you now. I'm still not quite sure what these oil tankers have to do with anything, and why they need to be there, why we can't just have it as being a ransom thing and not...
It's poorly explained, where in the movie you kind of need them to have like a mysterious, like it's the Hackinator or something, It's Lucifer Bot or some like
Yeah, the
moniker of
Plague.
this
Is that what they
hacker
call it?
who's
The Plague.
no, the Plague is the actual hacker name that Fisher Stevens has because the setup is that he is a former hacker who has taken a high paid job to be the head of security for this oil company,
Right.
which sort of makes sense, I guess. And he's older than everyone else, and he's on a skateboard and cool. And anyway, but you kind of need someone to be like, oh, I wonder what they're doing, and then maybe the gang could also be aware of this made up hacker and like, oh, he's a cyber terrorist. He's not a hacker. We're hackers and we're cool. And but I guess terrorism wasn't really a thing, or it wasn't as crystallized a term as it is now in 1995. And if it had
Yeah.
been, maybe this movie would have taken a different tack. But it kind of feels like two plots going on at once. The only way it really intersects is that Fisher Stevens basically seems to have the FBI doing what it wants them to do, and he threatens Johnny Lee Miller, basically saying that you'll go to jail, or your mum will go to jail. She'll this is what I love, she'll disappear, I'll change the records, it's like she'll never have existed.
Yeah,
And that's a real fear that we had in the 90s, that we could do that with computers, that you could just hack into the prison computer and
your permanent record has been deleted, thus you don't exist.
Exactly.
Like, that's
the threat. And we kind of use that, and that's what draws us in. They're arresting all these kids. They don't seem to notice Joey's been arrested for half the movie. Ramon is arrested, and then he's out of the movie for some unknown reason. It feels like a really sloppy edit. Again, I don't think it detracts from how much I enjoyed this movie at all. It does maybe it go some way to explaining why it would be easy to not really understand any of this.
Yeah, we've talked about editing in the last few episodes, and I think we're maybe becoming a bit more conscious of that. Like we're learning about movies, but I think there's so much responsibility in the edit for this. And as you watch movies that get it right, and you watch movies that get it wrong, you see just how effing important it is that you sequence things in the right place, that you give enough time and space. We often like decry library scenes or chalkboard scenes, but sometimes it's just what you need. You need to have the main characters sit down and talk about what's happening. Obi-Wan explaining the Force to Luke and saying the word Clone Wars, and oh my God, 30, 40 years later, they were still cashing that check because of how useful and important that scene was.
Yeah.
I just think this movie needs a good re-edit. Maybe you could cut out 5 or 10 minutes of montages and just give us a little bit more exposition, just so we could follow that. Maybe I'm just thick, of course, but you watched this twice?
Again, it could, like you said, if you could have established that the Fisher Stevens, it's the Hackinator. He's this guy, nobody knows who he is, but he's like he does corporate espionage, and he stole all this money, and no one really knows anything about him, and they've been trying to catch him, and maybe if that was the bad guy, and then it turned out that was also Fisher Stevens, and it was all this long con, and the kids figure it out, and I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for those damn kids. We're turning into a Scooby-Doo mystery, but at the same time, it kind of gives the characters something to do. Not that I don't enjoy what they're doing, because they're having their own little adventure where, again, they're fucking with this FBI agent. I love when he comes. What do they do to him? So he's dead. They make him deceased. They give him a load of parking tickets, so he keeps getting pulled over.
This is a weird.
They get his power shut off. Go on.
This is is it Wendell Pierce, isn't it? This is a really weird character in this movie. Like, he's clearly he's dressed like he works for NASA in the 60s. Like, he's the man, isn't he? He's the straight-laced, and he's the authority figure that these punks, these hackers, are trying to rebel against. I think it's really deliberate how, everything about him, he calls them terrorists and all this stuff. But again, it kind of feels like we've got two antagonists, which is never a good place to be. Two separate antagonists. They kind of work together.
Really are well defined as a proper antagonist. Like
No,
the
because of
FBI
all
agent,
conditional.
yeah, they're messing with him and things, but it's never like, oh, this guy fucked with us. Let's ruin his. They're not. No one ever's like, let's ruin his life. We're just fucking with him. We're just playing with him. And Fisher
Yeah,
Stevens again, like until the last act, really, he could be an ally. He could be a mentor. Like it's again really
and
poorly illustrated.
what's he doing? He's basically top slicing. He's skimming the transactions, isn't he? So he can get away with
He's
some
doing the
money. And
Office
you're like,
Space
well,
thing.
yeah, but that's exactly what these hackers should be doing as well. And then that like these hackers should be on the same time and say,
Yeah,
well, just give us a
literally,
cut, and
Sam.
then
Like
we'll help you.
5 years later, Office Space comes out, and that is the plot of the movie that the heroes are doing.
Hmm.
And it's like in this movie, he's the bad guy, and in that movie, it's like, oh my god, clap! These guys are
Yeah,
amazing. Oh my god, heroes.
yeah.
Um,
It is strange. Now, all of this, right? All of this criticism is only coming to light, in the Cold Lighter podcast, and because in the moment I didn't care. I wasn't bothered at all. I had no idea what was going on. I was completely
you're not
immersed.
questioning why they're hacking things from the top of the Empire State Building. You're not questioning any of
Which is
that.
which is a huge. I didn't note the Empire State Building. I was like, why are they at the top of the Empire State? But again, we move on. It's fine, and I think so much of that comes to the style and the way that they could present a lot of it. The cinematographer is very accomplished. Actually, he is
Yes,
Polish.
did Reservoir
Andrei
Dogs, Pulp Fiction, quite a lot of
Sekula. Yeah,
Tarantino
like
movies.
I think this guy is why this movie works. And you're working on Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs. There's a lot
It's
of,
good.
well,
It's good visual
that's it really.
storytelling from
But
that point of view that I think they do a good job of generally. Is that and a lot of that lends to the pace of this movie, where there is a
American
bit of a
Psycho.
lull. There is
Hmm.
American Psycho. There is a little bit of a lull in this movie, I would say, and I know that you agree. Um, but generally, it's fairly well paced. We're not, we don't have vast stretches of time where we don't know what the heroes are doing. We get kind of enough of Fisher Stevens, but not too much. I think that again, that's a good balance. Um, it's high schooly, but it's not too high schooly. We get 2 or 3 scenes, and it's mostly just to again sort of like flesh out this sort of romantic subplot, this sexual tension thing that goes throughout this movie,
Hmm.
culminating perhaps when they're watching Angelina Jolie almost have sex with this guy in her room, and they're just stood in the corner talking quite loudly about it. It's a very strange scene.
Yeah, there's lots of weirdness. There's lots of weirdness. But like that's where I think you can sometimes get away with just presentation. Like sometimes that's enough. We've talked about it before, like presentation versus substance, and most of the time you need both. And like an example would be like Lord of the Rings. We are presenting the shit. We are showing you very, very well what's going on, and we've also got this kind of story, moral arc, and everything there. The arc of these characters, not particularly clear. Like, what does Dade achieve? He goes from being a bit of a
Orgasm.
loser in his mum's house to going with Angelina Jolie. I guess that's an arc. I guess that's A to B. Two things have happened. I'm not sure though. I'm not sure it's really convincing. I'm not sure anyone.
I mean, I guess
Um,
like they resolve the problem, they fix the problem. Like
they save
it's going to
the
be another oil
they
spill,
save
and
the
they
evil
prevent the oil spill,
corporation from
and they
spilling oil.
save the
Like that's
shareholders' money. Yeah, it's a weird message, isn't it? Um, yeah, the
yeah.
actual arc of this movie, the only person, Fisher Stevens and Lorraine Bracco have an arc of they aren't in prison and then they are in prison. Um, the FBI agent, presumably his career is over because of how he's mishandled this, especially with all these over the top raids. Uh, all these hackers
What about
become better friends,
what?
hack the world.
I think that's literally. I don't think there is any ending other than hey, it wasn't us, because they were they're framed, aren't they? And then they go on TV and present the whole thing. The two Asian TV, like, what is happening? I love it. I love it.
The
But
two
again, like,
androgynous Asian TV presenters who are hackers, and it's like,
it's
pardon?
it's amazing. And then they're phoning up all of their, like, the Russian counterpart and the
Yeah,
you've got
yeah.
the English counterpart. Like, it's a really well imagined world. I don't think that grounded in any sense of reality. But boy, oh boy, like, that scene especially was just like, what is going on? I am off my face, and I'm going to go get some more alcohol to just
Yeah.
soak up this
It is
movie.
cool though. I like the cumulative sort of hack. Visually, I really like it. I think the spinning sort of phone booths. Is it at the big train station in New York, isn't it?
The spinning phone booths in Grand Central Station, like,
I think it's great. I think visually it's just sumptuous. You've got all
I
the
don't know if it's
flashaways,
great.
like it's a no, but it's great to look at, and that's the
No, I
thing.
know.
Like, it's stupid, but it's not any more stupid than anything else that's happening in this movie. You've got the flashaways to the Power Rangers HQ where Fisher Stevens is. This is a ridiculous server room, by the way.
With
Like,
pen,
an
with Penn
absolutely
and Teller pen.
insane.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Like, what?
and like LED, red LED underlighting under everything, and you're like, who designed this? Who paid for this?
It's
Um,
amazing.
but I like how basic this is. At its core, this is what hacking like this is. It's a what's the word? Like, they're bombarding the system because the system can only deal with so much at once. Like, they
Yeah,
literally set
denial
fire
of
to the
service.
fucking mainframe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And this is still something that hackers do today, and like, it's a pointed way to attack a website, for instance, is just to bombard it with so much traffic that it literally just can't cope with it, and it has to shut down.
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
and systems as well, and you get in, you steal all the passwords, and then you get out, and you can steal everyone's money and things, and it's that exists now. So I really like the way that they kind of, I thought that is somewhat well explained, that you kind of like, oh yeah, of course, that makes sense, I'm aware of that, that's the thing that they're doing. And that's the whole idea of, like, getting on the TV channel and being like, right, let's get hundreds of us, and then we can do that. Apparently the Cookie Monster virus that is in this, where they're like, type cookies,
Yeah,
that's real. That was a real thing. I was like, of
yeah.
all the things that happened in this movie that could or could not have been real, that wasn't one I would have guessed.
There's lots of this, isn't there? There's lots of this where they're really, like, they're leaning on
They
what's
obviously
going
did
on.
the
They're just,
research.
yeah, yeah. And that's, I think, you have to appreciate, don't you? You have to appreciate that this is trying to capture a space in time. It's trying to capture a culture, and it's trying to distill that into something that's also, like, entertaining to watch. And so, of all the criticisms of this movie, and there are lots, and I think if you sat down and actually watched it and took notes, you would be like, wow, plot hole, plot hole, plot hole, what's going on? Like, it wouldn't make sense. But you know what? You kind of just have to let a film like this wash over you. And if it connects with, you're gonna love it. And if you don't, as I think Ross, who didn't watch this movie, would not have enjoyed this. I really just don't
Ross
think
is
he
a
would have
real
enjoyed
Ross
this.
is a real stickler for things making sense, according to Ross, and I'm not sure this movie would. In fairness, while he's not on the
Mm,
podcast, I had a great moment. I remember when Ross got his first ever computer, because we were living together at the time in 1861, and
how's the Civil War
it
going?
was like
You all right? Yeah.
it was like watching a gorilla try to use a computer. When someone's typing with like one finger on each key, it was
Wow.
literally that. And I'm sure Ross will be horribly upset with me if he ever listens to this, but he won't. And it was properly like, oh, you've never even used a computer before, have you, mate? It was bizarre.
Wow.
So I suspect a lot of that maybe would flow over Ross's head. I also think maybe like the skate culture in this film as well. Again, sort of like in with that counterculture thing. It was very popular in the 90s. Fisher Stevens and his skateboard. Most of the rest of the characters kind of rollerblading around at all times, or they've got like the
Hmm.
wheelies, which have made a comeback. I particularly like the scene where Fisher Stevens is first introduced, because I remember thinking like, oh, he's on a skateboard and they're pulling him along. I wonder if that's. I thought it was for the shot. I was like, oh, it's because he's like, is he going to be some sort of weird savant and he never doesn't walk properly or like just glides? And then it panned out and he was just on a skateboard and I was like, oh, okay. So I'm really overthinking that how they made that shot.
Well,
And later on when he gets the floppy disk from Dade, he just like he's like ducked down and you're like, has Fisher Stevens ever been on a skateboard before? And he just skates past him and gets the floppy disk. It's a fantastically stupid shot. Where's he come from that Dade didn't hear him or see him from much further away? He's on a skateboard.
It does. It feels like one of those horror shots where the ghost just, appears towards me. Like, that's really creepy. Oh no, it's okay. He's just on a skateboard. It's fine. Everything's fine. This isn't a horror movie all of a sudden.
Yeah.
But these are all these are all the creative flourishes, aren't they? I think these are all of the small things in this movie that that just tickle your brain a little bit. Enough for you not to really understand what's going on, and that's fine. But you know what? I thoroughly enjoyed this movie, and I was completely immersed in it. I was completely immersed. I was,
It's just, it's really quite cohesive in terms of not the plot, of course, but in terms of the insanity of every aspect of it, the way everyone's dressed, the way everyone is acting and moving around, the way the sets are designed. Fisher Stevens' flat is like a fucking Bond sex dungeon. It's mad. The fact that Lorraine Bracco is like in this movie, but not really in this movie. She's in about 3 scenes of this movie, but is a fairly integral and central plot character, is just, again, insane. And but it's all like quite cordon isn't the word, but it's it kind of all flows together in a way that feels very intentional in a good way. And I would be interested to see what ended up on the cutting room floor, because there were a lot of scenes where I was like, oh, they obviously just really had fun with that, or they really enjoyed that, and so then that's in the movie. So it'd be interesting to see what they got rid of.
They just overindulge with it in a certain sense, but that's okay, isn't it? That's okay. We like those type of movies. Right, I think we have hacked our way into the mainframe of this. Do you
remember
this film?
Just to shit all over your ending? Do you remember that YouTube video, the Kickboxer or Kung Fury on YouTube? Have you seen it?
No.
I sent you a GIF of it the other day. In that movie, this Kung Fu detective, I can't remember why. It's a YouTube movie and it's shockingly poorly made but in a really intentional way. In this movie, the guy has like remember the Nintendo Power Gloves?
I'm with you, I think.
There's a nerdy hacker character and he hacks the main character through time with a Nintendo Power Glove. And the scene is just him like furiously typing and pressing buttons on this glove, and then a bar saying, "You're hacking too much time." It's amazingly stupid, but like it's not that far away from this movie, and that's like a satirical sort of like, isn't this stupid? But it's kind of like a looking back now, yeah, of course it is. But then when the majority of people, especially people over the age of 18 who would have had to be to see this movie, they didn't know shit about computers or hacking. So this is very like, out there, and is this real? And it is and it isn't. It's just a treat of a movie. Delectable.
Yeah, it is. It is, and it's one that I think we will probably come back to at some point. Like one of those.
Maybe try and get your wife to watch it.
I tried. She said no. She said no straight away. And that was when I described it to her as, it's just like like a silly hacking movie. Well, again, I completely misread what this film was going to be, and I think she would have hated this even more. So, probably bullet dodged. Right,
but if you are literally me or Sam, which maybe we're the same person anyways, but you might like
people listen to this, possibly. So, we'll take.
If you're the sort of person who could put Teen Wolf on a Wednesday night and just really thoroughly enjoy it, then you might enjoy this.
Yes, that sounds like fun. I look forward to doing something similar to this next week. I imagine we'll have to get pulled back into the Marvel crap-o-matic universe or something to keep Ross awake. but until then, we can.
I think you're
can,
underserving Ross there, but it will certainly be something shit.
I don't doubt that for a second. But in the meantime, boot up or shut up. That's the end of the episode.